Okay, welcome back. In the previous video, we created this enum called eItemState, and we created a variable called itemState of this type. Now, in this video, we're going to create a function that will handle the item properties based on which state we're in. So let's get started. Now, here in the protected section, I'm going to create another function. It's going to be void, and it's going to be called setItemProperties. And setItemProperties is going to take an eItemState. We'll call this state. And for the comment, we're going to say sets properties of the item's components based on state. Okay, let's go ahead and create a function body for this. And what this function is going to do is it's going to switch on the eItemState value, and it's going to set the properties for the different components of the item based on the state that we're in. So we're going to switch, and it's going to use state, and we're going to add these cases one by one. Now the first case we're going to add is going to be the pickup case. So eItemState EIS pickup. And I'll give this the break statement right off the bat. Now we're going to set the properties for the item here, and we'll start with the mesh. So we have this variable item mesh, and we need to make sure that the properties are set properly for the mesh when it's in the pickup state. This is when it's sitting on the ground and we're able to walk up to it and display its pickup widget and pick it up. So the mesh itself doesn't have to be simulating physics. So we can say item mesh set simulate physics, and we're going to set this to false. Now the item mesh does need to be visible in this case. So we're going to say item mesh set visibility to true. Because remember, when the item is going to change states, some states will have the mesh be invisible. So if it's going to switch to pick up from some other state, then we need to make sure to set its visibility to true. Now the mesh should not collide with anything. So we're going to set the item mesh response to all collision channels to ignore. So set collision response to all channels to eCollision response ignore. And we can set its collision enabled property to no collision. So item mesh set collision enabled, and this is an eCollision enabled enum, and we're going to set this to no collision. So we can comment this and say set mesh properties. Okay, next we need to configure the properties for the area sphere. So area sphere, and for this we're going to set the collision response. We're going to call set collision response to all channels, and this is an overlap volume, so we're going to set this to overlap. So eCollision response, and we'll choose overlap. Now for overlap volumes, this is usually query only for the collision enabled. So we're going to set area sphere set collision enabled to eCollision enabled query only. So we can comment this and say set area sphere properties. Okay, next we can set the properties for the collision box. Now for the collision box, we're going to set the response to all channels. So set collision response to all channels. And we're going to first set this to ignore. So E collision response, and we're going to choose ignore. But then we can set the response to visibility to block so that it can block for the line traces. So collision box, set collision response to channel, and this requires a channel, so E collision channel, and this will be the visibility channel, and we'll set this one to block, so E collision response and ECR block. Now for the collision enabled, we're going to need query and physics in order for the tracing to work. So we're going to say collision box set collision enabled, and this will be E collision enabled query and physics. So for this we'll say set collision box properties. Okay, so that takes care of the pickup state. Now, as we implement the other states, we can take care of setting these properties in the appropriate switch case. But for now, we only really have the pickup and the equip state. So that's the pickup state. Since we also have the equip state, we can add that. So let's go ahead and add the second case, E item state and equipped, and we'll add the break statement here. So for this state, we know that item mesh does not need to simulate physics. So we can copy these lines, the comment and set simulate physics to false. We know that it's going to have its visibility set to true. Now we can set its collision response to all channels to ignore, and we can set its collision enabled to no collision. So that will have basically the same configurations as the pickup state. Now let's copy these lines for the area sphere, however. And for the area sphere, in the equipped state, we don't want to overlap with anything, so we can set the collision response to ignore. And in fact, we can set collision enabled to no collision. So we're basically turning off the area sphere. Now for the collision box, let's go ahead and copy these and paste them here. And for the collision response to all channels, we're going to leave that at ignore, except we're also going to remove this call to set collision response to channel. We do not want it to block the visibility channel when the weapon is equipped, so we can remove that line. And then for set collision enabled query and physics, we can actually set this to no collision, since we don't want to collide while in the equipped state. So this takes care of the pickup and equipped states. And as we add and implement other states, we can then update this function to take care of setting the item properties for those states. Now we can call this set item properties in begin play just to initialize our item's properties based on the state that it's in. So let's go up to begin play, and we can call this just down here at the end of begin play and say set item properties based on item state. And we'll call set item properties, and here we're going to just use item state. Now let's go to shooter character and take a look at equip weapon. And here in equip weapon, we'll see that we're setting the collision response for the area sphere and the collision box. But really all we need to do is set the item state right here. And then once the item state is set, then we can simply call this function called set item properties based on the item state, and that'll handle all of the collision presets for the three main components, the mesh, the sphere, and the box. So let's go ahead and remove this from equip weapon. And I think what we can do is we can just handle that in set item state. That way, whenever we call set item state to change the state, then we'll also change the item properties by calling set item properties. So let's go down to our public setter called set item state. And rather than have this be force inline, let's go ahead and make it not force inline. That way we'll be able to put a little bit more functionality in here. So let's go ahead and create a set item state function body in item.cpp. So down here at the bottom, just under tick, we'll make it void a item set item state. It's going to take an e item state called state. And the first thing we'll do is set item state equal to state. And then we can simply call our new function that we made called set item properties. So we'll call that here, set item properties, and pass in state. Now whenever we call set item state, then all the item properties will be updated as we need to update them, which means in shooter character in equip weapon, as soon as we call set item state and set it to equipped, then set item state will get called, which calls set item properties. And if we go to that, we'll switch on state and we'll see that we're setting it to equipped, and we'll set all the appropriate item properties there. Okay, so that will conclude this video. In the next video, we're going to implement dropping the weapon so that we can swap the weapon when we pick up a new one and drop the currently equipped weapon and set its state to falling. And our newly picked up item, we're going to set that one to equipped. So we'll do that in the next video.